Presentation videos are one of those kind of videos that I make a lot of. And I think the overall reason why I make so many of them is because people really like the ability to communicate who they are and what they do in a short period of time. You could say a presentation video is a form of digital business card, which is why it's important to make a good presentation video. Because a good impression of who you are and what you do can have a greater effect in the long run. Because I've made so many of these before, I kind of want to give you some pointers and ideas to implement into your next presentation videos. You need the viewers to trust you, because if they don't, they wouldn't try to contact you afterwards. If the viewer watching the video doesn't trust what you're saying or feels like you're sounding dishonest or ingenuine, they are not going to try to connect with you afterwards. Now, I see a lot of people planning out a script and writing out every single word they want to say in a video. And because they are not used to that, they end up focusing so much on the script, so much of what they want to say, instead of how they want to say it. They sound like they're reading off a script, which actually is something we really don't want it to do in front of the camera, because it just sounds so monotone and ingenuine, kind of dishonest. Instead, what I recommend is actually making an interview guide. Now, this doesn't have to be anything complicated. Basically, you write 5 to 15 questions. If you have specific things you want to answer, you can write the answers first and then the questions afterwards. Instead of focusing on reading off a script, you're focusing on answering questions. It sounds way more genuine because you're actually thinking through the answer, and it's more organic, it's more normal. And if you don't feel comfortable in front of the camera, I can highly recommend getting someone behind the camera to ask those questions. And then you can actually answer the questions to a person instead of looking into the camera. Because it takes time to get used to talking to this weird object here. This kind of thing takes time. I know most people don't expect it to do, but it does take a good amount of time to actually create a good talking head, especially if you're not used to it. That, and also your questions will vary between the interviews you do, and that's okay. Sometimes the answer from interview 2 is going to be better than 3, and sometimes from first interview is going to be better than the third one. It changes depending on what you feel in that moment. And that is also what gives it this kind of organic and trustworthy feel. Oh yeah, and if you're having trouble figuring out what questions to ask, I have written down some examples down below that you can use. The next point is sound. Now, one of the most important parts of a video is the sound itself. I can be walking around this room, the frame is changing and all that, but because I have the audio relatively close, you still understand what I'm saying. Even if the whole frame is black, you still have an idea of what I'm saying, and you can follow along on the communication. But if I for some reason just took out the sound, one mistake that I see a lot of people do is actually having the mic too far away. Let's say I put this camera here. You can still hear me pretty decently, but what if I walk a little further back? If I'm sit over here, it's going to be way harder for you to understand what is happening and hear me correctly. And the sound also is deteriorating because of how far I have to be away. Now, even if I push it up in post to make the audio more the same, it still sounds a little weird now. It sounds a lot less clean and there's more noise to it, and it just in general seems worse. If people don't understand what you're saying, there's no reason for them to stay. They're gonna leave. Which is why it's so important to have good audio gear, or at least understand how audio works. If you don't have any microphones, I can highly recommend investing into like a cheaper lavalier, because they're gonna do a way better job than your laptop or your phone for that matter. It's gonna make such a big difference. The frame itself is also a big part of how people perceive your video. There are 3 main things I want to talk about. How you present yourself, what's in the background, and also what kind of light you're using. So it depends kind of on your branding. If you're really professional, it makes sense to have a business attire. If you're more casual, laid back, more relaxed, as it does have a subconscious effect. Next is the background. The background also has a big effect of how people perceive you. Even without saying that I create video, photo, you can kind of get an idea of it just because of the background I have, like products, lights, all that. If I shot this outside, you might think I'm more of an outdoorsy guy. Now, if you're doing presentation video and you're doing graphic design, it might make sense to put some of your work in behind you or around you, just to show off some of it. And also just thinking about what's in the background, what isn't. A good idea is to not have dishes or things like that lying around, because it might seem a little messy. The last part is of course the lighting. Now right now I'm using a big diffusion softbox to light my face. The main reason for using that light is the bigger the light source, the softer the light, and the better it's on skin tones. Now let's say that I didn't care what I was shooting and just used the normal lights. I kind of want to show you that. So this is what it would look like if I just used the normal house lights here. And as you can see, it's kind of not that pretty. It's like the shadows underneath my eyes making me look like a raccoon. It's really weird because I'm looking extra orangey because of the colors of the lights. So it's just generally not the best look. Now I understand most people don't have access to lights like I do. So a good option for that is actually getting close to a window or a bigger light source. If you can get closer to a window, you can get a pretty decent exposure with a pretty good looking light on you. And also just turn off the house lights. Most of the time they're pretty bad. And if you're interested in learning how to make a better interview setup, please let me know in the comments down below so I can actually make one. Tell a story. Stories get remembered. Stories create an emotional attachment to the listener and makes it so much easier for the brain to actually remember. There's actually a study showing that facts told with a story gets remembered 20 times more than facts alone. Let's say you are creating a product. Let's say you work as a graphic designer. You're creating branding assets, logos, and so on. Now if you just say that will not be nearly as memorable as if you told it in a story. As an example, you could talk about one of your clients. Let's say they had a branding issue where for some reason the brand they created, the logo, whatever, it couldn't get out to the audience they had. So you created an idea, you went out, talked with people to understand how do people see this brand, and from that created a logo that not only fit the audience they had, but also told some of the values in that. Those kind of stories make it a lot more easy to remember a brand and also make it more interesting. Because stories just get remembered. There's a reason there's so many stories out in the world. And I think everybody has a good story to tell. You just have to figure it out how to communicate it. And also if you're having problems figuring it out, one easy example could be just telling why you started and how you started. If you started your company or you started your service because you had issues with something beforehand. Let's say there wasn't a product in the market that you really needed and you created it afterwards because you needed it. That is a story that's interesting to tell. And it's something you should be proud of telling. I hope this video helped. And if you have any other questions, please leave them down below. I would love to help you out. And thanks for this time. See you next time.